Welcome, everyone, to the Masculine Wilderness podcast. I am your host, Tom Perez. I'm the founder and CEO of Epic Project, and this podcast is an ongoing conversation with men and the people, the women that love them, that work alongside them, that lead them, that inspire them. Today's another example of what that looks like. My good friend, Kristen Hubbell, is here, and she is the founder of Prevention Now. And I've invited her just to come on and talk about the work she's doing. So many of the things that she is doing most of what she's doing is very different than what we've done at Epic Project over the years, but there's a direct intersection with what Kristin brings and her background. So, Kristin, welcome.
Thank you.
Coming to us from the Pacific Northwest. So we're glad you're here. Tell us a little bit about where you were before you did this work, and what was it that drew you into it?
Yeah, it's a long story that I'll make short.
We got time.
So, I've spent about 20 years in the anti-violence space, but only about 10 of those in the anti-trafficking space. So it actually started as a young child for me. I grew up in a rural part of the Pacific Northwest. And we just recently found this little construction paper card that I made for my dad when I was clearly a new writer, so maybe 6 or 7 years old. It was glued and marker on it. And the card said, "Dad, we're under attack. Love, your secret agent."
Oh my gosh.
And, my whole family, we chuckled when we found this just a couple of years ago. None of us had any memory of it. But for me, what it really underlined, which is what I know to be true for kind of my entire journey, personal and professional, is just understanding there's conflict in the world. There's hardship in the world.
Yeah.
And I want to be a part of making it a better place. And how that looked is by the time I was about 14 years old, I knew I wanted to join the FBI. No family in law enforcement, don't really know where it came from other than that is how, I wanted to make positive change in the world. And so everything I did from the age of 14 till about 22, when I entered the FBI as an analyst, was just doggedly after the pursuit of how I could most impact the world in a positive way.
Yeah.
And
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was like, how does, you said, when did you write that card? Like
probably 6 or 7 years old, probably.
So how does a child have that sense, that well-developed sense of I don't know, justice or where'd that come from?
I'll be honest. I asked the same question in part because, growing up in a rural part of the Pacific Northwest, it wasn't like, my parents were watching international news stations where I was getting reports of what was happening worldwide. But what I remember, again, from a young age is you've got the right word, justice. Is just this understanding of what felt like, and it was very black and white in my younger years and, probably into my 20s as well, of right or wrong or unfair and fair. And why do these things occur? And how can I be a part of making it more? The word we use now is equitable, but I think one of our vision for Prevention Now is to create a world where a world that exists where no one fears violence, not just experiences it, but no one fears violence. And I think that's a possibility because I think there's enough of us that live in a world that we exist that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How has your understanding of the idea of justice grown since you wrote that card to your dad? Because so now you're maybe start that from your first day on the job as an FBI agent. Like what? How has it grown, and what has shaped that?
That's such a great question. I think what has grown is my understanding of the complexity and the nuance of what justice can look like or should look like, and also whose responsibility that is to hold, has all shifted. And I I think a real empathy for me, and I actually saw this with, so I was an analyst for the FBI, but I worked with a lot of FBI agents. I was on teams with them. There was a couple agents I worked with who also felt this way, that there's just a really thin line of choices, of life experience, of where and how we're raised between me sitting here today, leading an anti-trafficking organization versus me potentially having taken a different path that
Mm,
more harmful in the world or more harmful to myself or to my family. So I think I think I've grown a lot more in the compassion of there is no difference between all of us in the world.
mm.
And there's a real humility that I think is needed in this work to be grounded in that.
Yeah, that's, I'd love to hear you say that because that has been like for Epic, for our volunteers for years, it's been a nearly universal experience.
Mm.
Similar because as we're talking with active sex buyers, there's this kind of this pervasive sense that we're, 3 or 4
Yeah.
stupid decisions away from being that guy
Mhm.
and just
Mhm.
that awareness.
Yeah.
So I'm that's encouraging to me to hear you say that because
Yeah.
you're in a different lane in all of this. I want to back up though. You said something that was I thought was really insightful. You talk about I forget exactly how you said it, but talk about who's responsible
Mm.
for justice.
Yeah.
Like where does that how did you answer that question or like what have you learned about
Yeah.
who is responsible for
Who
this?
is responsible for
Yeah.
justice?
Whose job is it?
Uh, oh man, there is so many ways we could go with that question. I mean, there's big meta, spiritual questions that we could ask around
Yeah.
how the world operates. There's also, I think one of the things that I learned a lot about too is self-responsibility and accountability. And then I would say maybe it's not responsibility for justice, but because I would actually say we're all responsible for it. But when we use the word justice, I also feel like sometimes we're automatically associating it with, as we should, because it's the language we use, the Justice Department and
Yeah.
law
The
enforcement,
criminal side
the
of yeah.
criminal side of it.
Yeah.
Um, and I actually don't think that that is inclusive of all things that justice is. I think it's about creating some I'm trying to think of a good word because fairness isn't the word I'm trying to think of, but
You used the word equity just a little bit ago.
equity, yeah,
Yeah.
in how we experience the world, right? And how we
Yeah.
engage with the world.
Yeah.
And I think we all play a part in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that connected to the path you took that led you out of the FBI and into this work?
Yeah, a little bit. When I was close to a decade into my career with FBI, I truly loved my experience, grew incredibly as a professional, worked with incredible individuals. I actually didn't work on anti-trafficking issues in the FBI. I worked in kind of a bunch of different federal violations, different types of crime, but left the FBI to join an international anti-trafficking organization called International Justice
That's
Mission
right. That's right.
about
Yeah.
10 years ago. And that was
Okay.
really where a lot of my learning around kind of human trafficking specifically began.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that transition was really for me. It was a big identity shift, and there wasn't any specific reason I left the FBI, other than kind of an opening of my mind. Because as you remember, from the age of 14, FBI is all I ever wanted.
Yeah. Secret agent.
Right, secret agent from age
Yeah.
of 6.
Yeah.
So here I was, kind of in my early 30s, and just feeling really kind of a bit of a calling to potentially see what other type of opportunity there were to also create change in the world.
Yeah.
And in a different way. I think when I was younger, I had a lot of what we would call now kind of savior complex. And that's where you do pull yourself of, I am different than the other. And that's where I said that growth came kind of over, 10 to 15 years of we're all in this together. We're all the
It's
same.
it's fascinating to hear you as a woman talk about having that savior complex
Yeah.
because I typically think that's more something that afflicts men. I don't experience I don't know that I've
Yeah.
actually heard a woman talk, kind
Yeah.
of admit to that.
Yeah.
Um
I think it presents differently, but I think women do it in the same
I
ways or do it not in the same ways, differently than men do. But
how does it present differently?
I think it can present a little bit more like a helper,
Mm,
whereas for men, it's more saving. If I had to like put two words
yes,
to it,
yes,
but fundamentally, they can kind of come from the same place.
yeah, yeah. You're right.
Um, and I think the helper can be a little bit more, it's a little bit more, the edges are a little softer,
Yeah,
but ultimately we're still putting ourselves in that place
separate.
of separate and
Yeah,
I'm going to say a little superiority with that, which I think is incredibly problematic. Especially, I think existing in the world that's problematic, but especially if you're going to be in this type of work.
yeah. And I don't
Yeah,
see anybody that lasts very long if that remains your identity. Because that was
yeah,
certainly mine when
yeah,
I started too. I was, I can remember making public statements like, "This is man's work." And
yeah,
I played that card, and I know I pissed a lot of people off
yeah,
in doing it because you show up that way. But
yeah.
it's to hear a woman admit that that's an issue that's oddly comforting. Like
Yeah.
I'm not the I'm not the only one. So
No, yeah.
so from FBI, were
Uh-huh.
you assigned in different locations? Or were you in
Yeah,
because
I
it
was on East Coast, West Coast. I was at our headquarters. I was in our field offices. The FBI is headquartered in Washington, D.C., and then has, well, now I've forgotten. I think it's 50 field offices.
wow,
And then 72 actually internationally. So I spent some time overseas for the FBI in short deployments, East and West Coast, kind of. So I really got a wide range of, experience for the limited time. And there's people who
yeah,
spent 20, 30 years building their career there. So I want to
yeah,
nod that I was very young in my career, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
was able to.
So from that to IJM, which and I
Mhm.
see that, like I can see your vision and
Mhm.
understanding growing, because I had a ton of
Yeah.
respect for what IJM
Yeah.
brings. And so then was it from there that you started
It
Prevention Now?
was. It was, yeah, it was there. So my
What's
co-founder,
the story?
the story. There is a story because we were
Yeah.
still at IJM when we decided to found Prevention Now. So my co-founder, Mark Klucke, interestingly, also former law enforcement, career NCIS agent, was actually in local law enforcement before NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Uh,
I
he
love that show.
he had a cameo
Did he really?
because,
Huh.
yeah, because he actually retired as the director of the NCIS
Oh
before
my
he joined
goodness.
IJM. Yeah, but he was a career agent, so he, was asked to be in different positions of leadership. Mark is, I mean, one of the most incredible, humble leaders I've ever worked with. He's a mentor of mine. He sits on our board still, and he is my visionary partner. I mean, he and
Mm,
I really developed the vision for Prevention Now together. I'm just a bit younger in my career, so I went off to kind of execute it. But so Mark and I met and we were both working at IJM headquarters. I just spent a year in the field. I'd spent a year in East Africa and now was working at the headquarters in DC. Mark was the vice president of global investigations. And he and I actually just started talking about three things really in general that we felt like were missing. One, IJM specifically works only internationally. And so Mark and I were saying, yeah, but what's happening here domestically? And a lot, not that there wasn't anything happening here,
right, right.
but the models and some of the ways that IJM thinks about the work, we are like, that's not happening here in the US. Um, the second thing we want to talk about is, me being an intelligence analyst, Mark having led NCIS, and he developed things like data fusion centers and some really kind of impressive ways to use data, information, and intelligence to drive investigations, build policy. That was one of the things that Mark and I, we wanted to take a look at. Is that happening in the anti-trafficking movement? Are people using data for decision making in complex ways that we think could really help the movement? And the third, which really came out of being in law enforcement, and then honestly, even with IJM, some of the work there was still what we would consider reactive in nature. They're doing a ton of system level incredible work, so I don't want to minimize it, but some of it, Mark was still on the investigation side, is we wanted to stop these horrible things before they ever happened. And
Yeah,
so we said, we've spent enough of our career seeing the horrific outcomes and the ripple effect for families and communities and individuals when when exploitation occurs, and we want to get in front of it. So what's happening there? So that's really where our conversation started, is what's happening domestically, what's happening around prevention, how's data being used? And then the third piece that we feel really strongly about is how are agencies collaborating together. And that
Yeah.
again comes from our federal law enforcement experience, right? There's, anyone who's maybe a little older listening to this will remember 9/11 and some of the faults of federal law enforcement intelligence agencies not communicating well. And Mark and I lived through some of that shift
Yeah.
at the stage, which has really influenced how we think about collaboration in the anti-trafficking space.
Hey, Masculine Wilderness Podcast listeners. This is Lauren, your producer.
Let's talk about collaboration. Let's talk about data.
Yeah.
And like, where do you want to start? I want to talk about both, but what?
I mean, they're both such huge topics. Let's talk
All right,
about collaboration though. Oh no, you choose. What were you going to say?
All right,
Were you going to say data?
I was only because it's not, to me, second nature, but I'd like to explore a little bit of why it is so important. So I'm the guy that was happy to get a C- or a D+ in stats in college. Like, I was like, yay, I didn't flunk. And so it's never been something really intuitive. But what I've grown in and what I've come to understand, and tell me if I'm seeing this right, in the work that we do, like, data is, I hope this doesn't sound too reductionistic, but it's numbers telling a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we have to tell the right story, tell the true story.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do that without numbers.
Yeah.
So is that, am I in the ballpark there?
Yeah. That's
So
a lot of how we think about it.
So talk about, talk to me a little bit about what you do with that and how does that play out in the lane that you're in and why is it so important?
Yeah. And what I'll caveat a little bit, because when we use the word data, I mean, a lot of different things come up in our brains, right? Could be Excel spreadsheets. It could be Bloomberg Finance, website. It could be, I mean, there's a bunch of different things that we can think of when we think of data. So the way Prevention Now has a really specific type of data that we look at, and also the way we think about it. So there's a lot of data that's important for this field, which I'm not going to speak to all of it, but I'll speak to kind of how we look at it. And that's the story part that you just talked about.
Yeah.
So the information that we use are basically an aggregation of individual stories. So an individual who has experienced trafficking or maybe at risk for trafficking, we are better understanding their story and aggregating it in a certain way that tells a larger story. And so the reason why we think about it and talk about it that way is because it is easy to get removed. When you're talking about numbers, when you're talking about data, it can get cold pretty fast. And especially for us, because it's not like we're looking at finance data. We're not, which I would, I might argue that there's stories there too, but we're not looking at some data like that. We're actually looking at people's stories just in a kind of large and complex way. And so there's a couple different things that I think is important to talk about here. One is getting good data that tells a good story is really, really hard. And the anti-trafficking space hasn't done that well for a long time. And it's also, there's always going to be a tension. So if you talk to like just pure researcher who doesn't care about people, you want to extract as much information as you can. Right?
Yeah.
You want to get everything you can so that you can understand it, understand the problem, and do all the right things. But we're talking about people here. We're talking about people's stories. Or we're talking about, all sorts of things around that, which is like agency around their own story and how that's used. We're talking about individuals sharing what they do or don't want to share in a trust-based environment. There's a lot of complexity when we think about data as it relates to people's stories and how we can use that. So I think my team is really keen to that, but this work can't move forward without it. And so we're just constantly kind of living in these tensions and taking a lot of advice from a lot of really smart people and working with survivors to better understand how we can approach building, so I didn't mention it yet, but we build machine learning models and complex statistical models to look at how we can prevent human trafficking. And so even in our building of those models, we want it to be human-centered and people-based.
So, and we're going to I want to come back to that because that's real critical. But just the kind of a half a step back.
Yeah.
How did you learn? How did you acquire this kind of sensitivity with respect to these are human stories. These are actual was that something that was in your head and heart even when you were like at the FBI, or like how did you come to
Yeah.
value that?
That's such a great question. I don't even know that I've thought about it because I don't know that I could say like a moment in time.
Yeah.
But I would say that it has probably also been a growth in, um, I think even valuing, even understanding, for me, even a growth of understanding that data and story are one and the same, I think has been a growth area for me, probably prior to prevention now. And so in starting prevention now, it was a part of the culture I knew that we had to bake in and that I wanted to bake in, even in how I hire, even in our own data policies and how we think about and interact with data. But I would say, I think it's all tied, even just like what we were talking about before, and this makes sense, right? It's all tied together of that level playing field of seeing us, we're all humans.
Yeah.
We're all experiencing the world. Women struggle with saviorism just like men do.
Yeah.
Like so I think just honoring that and then learning from other people. I've seen other people do it really well. I've seen we had some incredible partners in Alaska that I think also taught me culturally about story in a different way that was really meaningful to me. So I think one of the things that we just try to do, and as a part of, again, kind of the culture I want to build, is just being learners. I know you guys are that way too.
Yeah.
We just want to, yeah.
It seems like you may have been in the FBI in a large institution, like kind of an outlier in that regard. Just that, I don't know. I tease you. I know I do. I tease you about being cop-like.
Yeah.
And you have that vibe from time to time, but this is not cop-like. This kind of innate empathy.
Yeah.
Was that, I'm curious if in a large system, does that, how do you navigate that? Because there's, I can only imagine at the end of the day in the FBI, like there's just work that has to be done.
Sure.
Decisions that have to be made, all of that.
Yep.
How do you keep the empathy alive in that?
I mean, and this is where it's important to like understand in all the work we do, whether it's the data or even the FBI, is like think about the one, not about so the FBI is 50 offices domestically, 72 offices globally, 30,000 people or agents that work there. I can't quite remember the numbers.
Wow.
And so you think about it on that scale. And there are certainly people in offices that maybe don't lead with empathy, and individuals, I should say, again, going back to the one. I had the experience, so this is anecdotal, which is important data. Anecdotal information is still important, where I actually was surrounded by a lot of agents who had that empathy, a lot of FBI agents in really hard work.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's perfect all the time. And I'm not saying, you don't because it's really hard work. It can be incredibly, also there's a lot of vicarious trauma and primary trauma that happens in law enforcement. But I worked with a lot of really amazing agents who led with empathy, both kind of internally as a support to one another, as well as externally in the work that we were doing. And even perpetrators were still humans. There's still individuals. Yeah.
That's good for my cynical heart to hear you say that about cops, but it's also like that has been my experience. I'm not a cop, but I've had the privilege of working with many over the years, and I think we know a lot of the same people, or at least we've seen a lot of the same heart.
The same heart.
Yeah. That's really good to hear. So your story is so fascinating because I think your evolution as a leader in this work and then the skill set that you've been like, it's such a unique thing. So, from the FBI to IGM, starting prevention now, data is integral to what you're doing. How then does collaboration play into this?
Yeah.
Because you are as empathetic as you are, in my experience, you're also as innately collaborative. Like, how do these things all play together?
Yeah.
Why is it so critical?
Well, I think a couple things. One, going back to what I mentioned about working in federal law enforcement and how it was, how Mark, my co-founder, and I saw it play out is, when we were on task forces, which task forces in federal law enforcement is a little bit different than when we think of kind of anti-trafficking multidisciplinary teams. We were typically working on a specific investigation or a specific operation with other agencies. And these are agencies that don't always like each other. They have different cultures. They might have different missions. They have different types of people that are hired there, but we were all brought together to work on these really, really important operations. And what we saw, kind of Mark and I collectively across our experience, was each agency brought such a specific skill set that when they did it really well and were allowed to do it really well in combination with all the other strengths of all
Right.
the other agencies, incredible things happened.
Yeah.
Incredible things happened. And so, and sometimes we were friends at the end of the day, and sometimes we weren't, and that was okay too. Actually,
Yeah.
I don't actually believe, I believe deeply in trust-based collaboration, and I also don't think it means that you have to go to each other's barbecue. I don't think they have to be the
Yeah.
same thing. I think it's awesome when they are. But I've seen it work in other ways. And so anyways, it was really bringing that to the anti-trafficking space, and the need around that we saw as a couple things. One, I think in general, the anti-trafficking movement domestically is known for being a bit siloed. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. So everyone's working in their own space. We even see that, though, it can even happen sometimes across law enforcement, right? I mean, we saw that different systems, different priorities, that can be challenging. I think the other thing that I saw and how I had wanted to build Prevention Now is one agency is not gonna stop human trafficking.
Right.
One agency will not do that. It has to be all of us.
Yeah.
There's no other way. If we want to create actual change, if we want to have movement for reducing human trafficking in the U.S. or in the world, there's no other way than agencies working together and learning how to do it effectively. And then I think the last piece, and this is how Prevention Now is developed, is we wanted to bake collaboration into our model. So we don't actually, what that looks like is we serve other agencies in our work. And we also need them to trust us and to help us. And we call that internally, we call it integrated collaboration, because collaboration is like,
well, it's one of those words that when you say it, everyone nods like, yes, oh, that's important.
We should do that. Of
we
course.
We should do that. Yes.
We should do that.
We should just let's get lunch.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you give me an example of what this looks like a case study or something just within the work that you do? Like, how does this play out? What is the work that you're doing currently, and how does it reflect, the high value for data and the high value for collaboration? Is there a particular story that comes to mind?
Yeah, I could set a bit of a story. Well, I'll do two quick stories. One is about our current work, and one is kind of the past. One is we did some work up in Alaska with Lauren Trentham, who you know well. And a couple other.
She's a piece of work.
She's an amazing piece of work.
She is. Yes. Yeah.
And so we, after talking, so one of the things we did up in Alaska when we started our work there is just started talking to agencies to understand what their barriers to data were, to using data, to collecting it, to sharing it. And what we found is some of what needed to happen was all of these different agencies to come together. So Prevention Now was like, we will partner. We partnered with Lauren Trantham and Signify Consulting, which is a consulting agency up in Alaska, and say, hey, we'll develop a data summit. So the first year we did what we could, made some invites, 50 people came, and it was great. The second year, there was another partner, Data for Indigenous Justice, which is an incredible organization up in Alaska. They had actually supported the year before. They said, hey, we can help provide the food. We said, that would be great. Budget is always an issue. Well, this next year, all four of our agencies said, okay, let's do this again. And we learned a lot from last year, and let's do it better. So here we had an event where four separate agencies with four separate missions And for separate cultures, we're coming together as a collective for a single purpose, which was to develop a space for agencies and survivors in Alaska to start talking about how we can use data to impact human trafficking in the state. And not one of us was a leader. Not one of us, it wasn't like one of us got a grant and the other one were subcontractors or anything like that. We really came together for this. And it was an incredible event that we just kept getting asked, when can we do this again? Because we could actually make impact. So for me, that was in a really simple way. It's actually not super complex. It was just four agencies coming together and saying, hey, we have this common vision. Let's figure out how can we make it. Okay, you can do this part. Great. We can do this part. Okay, you can run the back end. Great. You can MC. You guys got a little bit of funding. Incredible. We can put it towards this. So that's kind of, for us, how simple integrated collaboration can be. Leave egos at the door. You leave scarcity at the door, because that's a real driver, I think, of the lack of collaboration, is the feeling of scarcity. And you recognize there's enough resources and goodwill to make the thing happen.
Which I can draw the line straight back to what you said earlier about humility. It's like you don't get there to that moment in Alaska without some kind of real significant level of humility.
And I would say I see humility as a spectrum that is continual.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm learning more humility. There's still more to learn and more, which I hope I say for the next 40 years.
Yeah. So, okay. And that was just
a
few years ago.
That was a few years ago. So I can talk a little bit more how we're really specifically using, not only in our work collaboration, but how we want to use data to facilitate collaboration. So that might be a little bit more.
Say more about that.
Study. Yeah. Because that's, I think, the ultimate hope. So some of what we do is we partner with local nonprofits, county or state agencies, kind of whoever wants to partner with us. And it usually is individuals, they're serving individuals who are at risk for experiencing human trafficking or who have experienced it. And they have some data or some information that they're willing to share. And so we take a look at their data, and what we want to understand is what risk factors and vulnerabilities exist in a kind of at a community level that create the conditions for human trafficking to occur. So we call those drivers, key drivers. We pinpoint key drivers that create risk and vulnerability. And then the other thing is distinct pathways into human trafficking, right? So when we think about an individual's journey, what is that pathway that ultimately has led to an experience of human trafficking? And that's not just an individual's experience. We think about it relationally. We think about it community. We think about it from a society level. It's public health. I did not make that up. That's a public health framework.
Yeah.
But what comes out of that? So as you can see, the first part of the collaboration is this agency, they don't have to share their data with us. And we're also not asking them to pay for these kind of analytical services. So what we're doing is we're coming to a community and saying, hey, this is a skill that we have that we think could help support your agencies to better understand, to better uncover why human trafficking is happening, what's creating vulnerability, so that you can more effectively serve your clients, individuals that you're providing services to. What that looks like on the back end that we've started to see and we're hoping to see more of is some of our analytics will create kind of uncover most at-risk subgroups. So these are not actual individuals, they're not actual subpopulations, but what it is a combination of risk factors, which I can give an example in a second.
Yeah.
But why that's helpful is because a lot of agencies specialize in different things. So if you know there's a subpopulation that has experienced homelessness, they've experienced substance abuse, and they have high rates of attending school, now all of a sudden, that's not just an anti-trafficking agency with a program can work. You're talking to substance use
school
districts, Department of Education, counselors, homeless youth shelters. So all of a sudden, this data has opened up. It's not just on you and your agency. It's a tool to bring agencies together to say, hey, if we collectively do this, we now can ensure, and what we found in our case study was in Central Oregon, was we were looking at youth who were already high risk for experiencing trafficking. We looked at over 600 cases and found 86% of the youth we were looking at kind of fit into one of these 4 categories of different types of risk factors, combination of different types of risk factors. Some had high school attendance rates, some had low school attendance rates. It looked kind of different. But again, that gives the information, that gives the agencies and the nonprofits, and even from a funding perspective, hey, where are we going to put resources first?
Yeah.
We're all under-resourced, we're all overworked. So how can we start supporting the most vulnerable together first?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can see how that approach also potentially could open up different opportunities
Yes.
for people to intervene, like people that don't necessarily, like someone may have said, I don't deal with trafficked youth, but I care about the homeless population. Well, many of these things intersect.
Or even think about even a step further from that, Big Sisters, Big Brothers program.
Yeah. Yeah.
We heard of one of our partner agencies. We're like, hey, we've been looking for a way we could partner with Big Sisters, Big Brothers. This data was the unlock.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that application in youth sports.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is rather around in my brain as you're unpacking this is, the issue of someone being sexually exploited, of trafficking, it's such an emotionally weighty thing, for just the average person, the thought that someone would be exploited that way. And it leads to, this has been my own personal experience, but just in so many people that I've talked with over the years, it's like it leads to this almost unrestrainable impulse to, we got to do something, storm the castle,
right.
Take no prisoners. So my question is, what happens in this work in the absence of reliable data?
Oof.
Because it's, when you're all worked up emotionally, you don't need data. I think we just need to go and, arrest the bad guys or whatever. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be accountability, but in the absence of readily available, reliable data, what can happen? Like how?
That again
what do you see?
A scary spectrum. It can be a scary spectrum.
Yeah.
One can just be that we're not actually helping people. Which that sounds small. It's actually a really big deal when we think of the thousands of nonprofit agencies that are wanting to approach this.
Yeah.
We don't have good data actually on the prevalence of human trafficking, sex or labor in the U.S. So I don't even want to say a number for the individuals that could be exploited. So I would say at the very least, we're not creating impact. We're not helping people. We're not. I think at the most is when it could be harmful.
Yeah, right? That's something like, so what's the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario. And we talk about this in our work as well. Worst case scenario, when kind of on the perspective that we're looking at, is certainly, as a term that came up, quite a few years ago now, but profiling. When we start talking about risk or using analytics or using aggregated data, profiling can be kind of close on the heels there. We want to be really, really careful about that and really, really tied to the individual story. I think the other harm that can happen is, for us, as we better understand vulnerability, when we think about trafficking, we think about it in 3 parts as a business, if we think about it as a business. And, you guys talk about demand. We are working with individuals who are at risk, which is on the other side of that. And in the middle is the market maker, and that's the trafficker, right? And so that's this kind of middle piece here. So there are still individuals who I would say are open to exploitation, right? And so wanting to be careful that we're also not giving kind of insight to how exploitation could occur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a fourth. They always talk about the 3-legged stool. I think it's a chair. I think there's a fourth. There's a fourth player there, and that's the bystander.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And I think, in my experience, most of those bystanders are
Yeah.
men, because women just seem to show up and they'll roll up their sleeves. But I think there's an untapped resource there. But I don't want to go too far on
Yeah.
that. I want to also talk about, because it's all part of the mix of what you do that I think is so utterly unique. But the way you employ technology and
Mm.
more
Yeah.
specifically AI. Can we talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that? Because it's a subject that's fraught with all kinds of
Yeah.
fear and anxiety, or
Yeah.
idealism and hope,
Yep.
depending on who you're talking to. But how does that technology play into what you're doing?
Mhm.
I think that'd be
Yeah.
the first thing. And then
Yeah.
can you maybe zoom out a little bit and give us some helpful ways of thinking about this technology,
Yeah.
going forward? Because depending on who you're talking to, it could be the end of the world. It could be a brave
Yeah.
new world.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think what's interesting too is when we started this work, I started working on prevention now in 2019. We launched in 2020. A part of the model was always to use AI, but it wasn't talked about then. We didn't have
No.
ChatGPT. No one was talking about it. So with that both came, some education, as well as there wasn't as many thoughts and feelings around it. So I think one of the things I want to do first is talk about the differences in two buckets of AI. Now, I want to frame this as I am not a technologist. I am not a data scientist or a statistician. I work with and hire very, very smart people. So if anyone has that background, who's listening to this, just bear with me. This is the layman's version.
This is for the kids in the back of the room. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I was with you in that statistics class, probably.
Yep.
So what we want to talk about is large language models, which is what most people think of when we say AI these days. And that's the ChatGPT, that's
Got it.
Claude, so large language models, and they take a look at large amounts of data, and it tends to be kind of text-based. What we're looking at, we actually don't use large language models. It's not the type of AI that we use. We use different versions of statistical modeling and machine learning that looks more at predictive modeling.
Okay.
And those distinctions are incredibly important. One, because the outcomes are different, the type of data that they're using is different, and it isn't that we would ever just run a ChatGPT bot on our data or something like that.
Right.
Agent, not bot, agent. So that's kind of the first distinction. So what we take a look at is when you unpack AI, it's really, 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 really complex math. Really complex math. And which is amazing. And I think there's a lot of harm that can be done. I think there's a lot of good things that can be done. The way we're choosing to use it is it goes back to putting a couple different things in place, ensuring that the way that we're building the math, the algorithms, is staying connected to the individual story, because it can become problematic if we don't, and being accountable in kind of the outcomes. So as we're getting our analytical insights, we don't actually just stick it into a magic machine. So this is the way I thought it worked 6 years ago.
That's what I'm imagining. You got some really cool machine somewhere.
Right?
Yeah.
I had hoped it worked that way. It does not for us.
Okay.
So what I'd hoped is, we'd have all this data, we'd stick it into a big black box, the magic machine, we'd ask it what we want it to, it spits out what we need. So instead, it's an iterative process. So when we're working with communities, especially partner agencies or communities, we are working with them as we're doing some of these machine learning models of how does this fit with what you know of human trafficking in your community? Are we seeing? And so it is actually like a building process, right? So the work we do, we couldn't just download the code and give it to someone to use because of the process it is. From an AI perspective in general, I do think, as you've probably seen with most things, it's important to hit the middle ground. I think for anything, so this is what I've experienced in my career, is everything can be used for bad and everything can be used for good. And that is not new.
Yeah. That's as old as that's as old as evil.
Exactly. That's as old as evil. And I think for those both that think AI is, kind of a magic machine that could save all things, and for those that think that it is evil and should be shut down, I just think that we need to have a little bit of perspective in recognizing it's a tool, and all tools can be used for good and evil. And then how do we want to engage with that?
Yeah. Using this technology, talked
Yeah.
about predictive AI.
Yes.
What kinds of things do you hope to be able to predict that
Yeah.
could change outcomes?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that we want to predict is kind of what I'd mentioned earlier, which is what we're on the path. We're on the path to predicting, but it's only as good as the data. So I'll go back to the data in a second.
Yeah.
Is uncovering what are those pathways into human trafficking that are specific to different communities. So I'll give a quick example
Yeah.
or key drivers of the case study that we did out in rural Oregon. We looked at about 40 different risk factors. So this is the other thing. When we think about risk factors, experience of homelessness, experience of abuse in various ways, like those are some of the things that we think of with risk factors. So we looked at 40, but there could be hundreds, there could be thousands. So where we want to get to is understanding more risk factors. But right now we stick with what's known because that's the best way to build the models. So we took a look at that. The partner agency we were working with, what we thought in the top risk factors was for sure going to be experience of homelessness. There's tons of research out there that shows homelessness and the outcome of sex trafficking. There's a high relationship there, kind of correlation. And for these communities we're looking at, it was not in the top 7. It was not in the top 7 drivers. And one of the risk factors that popped up into the top 7 was poor nutrition, which totally shocked all of us.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Totally shocked all of us.
Why?
Well, so we have a hard time understanding the why, but that's where we can start digging into the community. Okay, it's poor nutrition. So let's now understand where we can get food. What do our food banks look like? What are our school lunch program policies? What about during the summer for after school programs? Is food provided? Because it could have been tied to a lot of different things, which we didn't go kind of to the next. But that's how it gives direction of like, oh, we didn't realize poor nutrition was in our top 7. Part of it. And of course, when you say that, of course, we know that to be true. But as far as in 40 risk factors where to focus, well, that one's in the top 7. So that's really where you put some energy. So for us, that's what we're already doing. Where I would love us to be able to go, and I just don't know when the data is going to get there for us to be able to do this, is to even understand everything of like industries that create risk within communities or community park placement that could create higher risk. Or, I mean, there's so many kind of aspects to what can create vulnerability that we don't understand and know, that my hope is we can get there, but the data has to be there for us to do the AI.
Yeah. I'm sitting here listening to you talk about the risk factors, vulnerabilities that would lead to someone being exploited. And in my head, this is just where I always go. It's like, what would it take? I guess here's the question. Yeah. What would it take data-wise and collaboration-wise for you to be able to identify the risk factors that would lead a young man to buy sex? Less than a week ago, I stood in front of 130 young college football players. And I began a conversation about this with them. It's a pilot project we're working on. And like, that feels like the wilderness in this work. So what would it take? What would it take to be able to say with similar confidence that you did, what are the risk factors that would lead a young man to exploit another person? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah. What always leads us to the future is looking at the past. And that's the data that we don't yet have for sex buyers. So if anyone is willing to do that,
we have a little bit.
You do.
This
Yes. It is for us, and there's some. What's challenging too is there has to be some consistency in how the data is collected, what components of the data that's collected, that's where we get into some of the tension. So it would really be kind of a group of individuals who have already bought sex, unfortunately, and us. We would probably consider it either trust-based conversation or observationally understanding their life story, basically.
Yep.
And that's really the data that would be needed to do some of this work.
It feels really counterintuitive to hear you, but this you're so consistent this way. It's empathy and humility, but like you're talking about what you're describing is a scenario where these buyers are treated as human beings. That's a tough one.
It is.
knowing what you know, especially.
Even here, yeah, even for me, yeah,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah. But I feel like that's just the ragged edge of this work. Like we gotta figure that,
yeah,
those kinds of things out. And it kind of to that point, I'm curious, like if you look, so
yeah,
Prevention Now's 5 years old.
yep. We'll
So
be 5 in October.
okay, five in October. Um, what for you, just like vision wise, just zoom out a little bit.
Yeah,
What's on the ragged edge of this work for you? Where do you see this going? What are some hopeful signs? What are some
yeah.
things that give you a little bit of pause?
Hmm. Yeah. Hopeful signs. A couple things, especially having had this, talking about these things for the last 5 years, is I see the anti-trafficking movement ready for and hungry to use data in a different way
Yes.
than I think even 5 years ago, and I'm really hopeful about that. We've got some work to do
Yeah.
for that.
And I would say yours is one of the voices that is driving that, just from my perspective. Just I'm pretty well networked in the
Yeah.
movement, and I think you're carrying that banner for sure. But
Oh, thank you.
there's a handful of
Wonderful.
people that are doing that. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No,
Yeah,
that's actually great to hear.
yeah,
That because I do think that it is exciting to see that kind of at the individual agency level.
yeah,
I think so moving in the right direction. I think one of the things I'm interested in for Prevention Now. So we recently kind of mostly been in the Pacific Northwest. We're actually starting to do some work this week. This year we're about to kick off work in the Northeast and in
mm,
Texas, which we're really excited about. And I think where I would love to see this go is further than only the topic of anti-trafficking, and it goes
mm,
to collaboration. Because when I'm talking about experience of homelessness, when I'm talking about experience of abuse, when I'm talking about education, right? These are all adjacent life experiences that make up a whole person,
yeah,
right? No one is one experience,
right.
and but yet all of our kind of services and movements and systems are operating individually. And so what I would love is to somehow see, I don't even know what it would look like, all of these interconnected spaces coming together to create change in the world.
Talk to me. I've just glanced at the clock. I want to want to keep this. I want to wrap it up shortly, but it's right there in the name, and we haven't really talked directly about it. But I feel like we've unpacked so much of it. But
Yeah.
Prevention
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
what? So in light of all the stuff we talked about,
Yeah.
in light of data and collaboration and AI, like
Yeah.
what is prevention?
Yeah. This is something, I mean, I mentioned it. It has been sprinkled throughout our
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
So I might point back to a few things, Mark and I having been on what we call the reactive side, which again, I don't want to downplay that super
hmm
important part, providing services to individuals who've experienced trafficking after they get out. Incredibly important part, but really this huge gap in prevention. And often when we're talking about prevention in the anti-trafficking movement, people automatically go to education. Prevention must mean education,
hmm
which the research doesn't always support. That we know that education has the impact that we want it to. Education about a topic like this has the impact that we want it to.
yeah,
And so what does prevention look like? Well, we just borrow from other places in public health. This is where I like to just kind of throw up the flag, is that Prevention Now isn't doing actually anything new. It just hasn't yet been done in the anti-trafficking space. We're
mm,
borrowing from how the public health space is looking at suicide prevention. Some of the type of analytics we're doing are in homelessness prevention. And so when we're talking about prevention, there's an old story, and I've just now lost who originally said it, but they talked about kind of these community members. There's a river that runs through this village, and seeing the babies come.
yeah.
Yep. So this is where
Drifting
the word
down the river. Yeah.
come down the river, going grabbing those babies, getting them out of the river, grabbing the river, and finally someone said, we got to go upstream.
Why are there babies in the
Why
river?
are there babies in the river? We got to go figure out why and stop it upstream
Yeah.
before they get into the river.
Yeah.
And so we'll hear this word upstream a lot, but I think that visual is really great. And so when Prevention Now thinks about prevention, we want to look upstream to the experience of trafficking.
Yeah.
So hopefully long before it happens, but that's not always the case. But that goes back to vulnerabilities, pathways to trafficking, and stopping it. I had one partner one time say, human trafficking is kind of like a highway, and there's on ramps and off ramps to this highway of of the experience of human trafficking. What Prevention Now is doing is we're stopping the on ramps. That's what
And
we want to do.
opening up more off ramps, ideally.
Yep.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. What is, if you can share a personal experience, because there's so many through lines in your story that I just love, but just this authentic, empathy and compassion for people is clearly one of them. Is there a hopeful story? It doesn't even have to be about trafficking, but about someone with vulnerability that was able to overcome it. Is there a story for you that that is kind of a reference point or something that helps you navigate when it gets really tough?
When it gets tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Or is there a leader, a person that you've had the privilege of working with that is a source of encouragement? One or the other?
Yeah. And I know that you'll appreciate this. There are some individuals that I do think of, that I think give me hope also just for all the work that we do, but because it's their stories, I won't share them. And I know that you understand that as well. Yep. But I think one of the individuals who I feel like I have learned the most from, honestly, not just in the anti-trafficking space, but as a human. She was a woman who came on as a fellow for Prevention Now in her master's, helped us develop the work in Alaska, is now, leading so much in the anti-trafficking space. She was on the Human Trafficking Advisory Council, was appointed there by one of the presidents. Her name's Josie Hayano. And Josie, the way Josie has such a strategic, visionary mind for the hope of what could be. And also, I don't know that I've ever met someone who stays so closely tied to the human, to the individual. Like if I can be more like Josie in this work, that's what I'd like to be.
Yeah. That's inspiring in itself, just staying close to the fact that these are humans. And again, this is one of those through lines in your own story, like that came back all the way back to you being an FBI analyst. Like there's humans at the end of these stories. I appreciate that so much about just how you show up and the work that you're doing. So I'm grateful. I feel like I know we could talk. We could talk all day.
Yeah.
Lauren just reminded me that we're going to have Josie on this podcast.
No way.
Well, we've been trying. In fact, I think we might have had it scheduled and then I screwed up my schedule or something. So yes. Yeah. We want to get her on.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
It's going to be an incredible conversation.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I want to give you the last word. And just, but it's selfishly motivated. This is not an exclusive conversation with men, but it's really aimed at men because I think bottom line, exploitation is a problem in the hearts of men. So as a leader, what is your best bit of encouragement / advice to men? What would you say to men?
Two things, actually, if I could, and I don't know if you have this audience who listens to this, but I first wanted to give space to, if there are any men who are listening who have experienced exploitation or who have experienced abuse and trafficking, that we see you. Yeah. I know we often talk about the experience of women in this space, but we see you and we're working for you and we're fighting for you. So I want to say that first to if there's men who are listening who have that experience.
I appreciate that.
The second that I would say, the word that I would use, it's one of my favorite words that I would challenge any men who are listening to this today is to get curious. Get curious. Get curious about yourself. Get curious about society and the role that men play in society. Get curious about this movement. If you find yourself wanting to kick down doors, get curious about that. Where's that coming from?
Yeah.
What do we actually want? And so I think one of the most important things that begets learning in this space is getting curious. I just did it the other day. I had to sit on an email for 2 days before I responded to someone. I told my team, I was like, I was getting in my own way and I just needed 2 days to get a little more curious before I knew I could respond. So that would be my word to them.
Thank you, friend. I appreciate what you do and how you do it.
Thank you, Tom. It's such an honor to talk with you and to be invited on. And I'm so excited for maybe some potential collaboration.
There's an idea.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Would love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And we'll talk soon.
Okay.